The Catholic Morning Show on Iowa Catholic Radio.
You know, I grew up singing that song about rain or shine, snow, whatever. The postman is going to deliver the mail. Well, no matter the weather, you got the Catholic Morning Show here for you, folks. Glad to be waking up with you this morning, even if it's chillier than usual for the middle of March. We're happy to be here. I'm Bo Bonner with Deacon Mark Campbell. Brady running the boards. All of us glad you are with us. Stay tuned on the second half of the show. We'll hear an update from Joe Stopulus, and we'll be speaking with Matt Selby. But right now, let's turn to our first interview of the day. With us is John Bishop. He has a new book out, New Adam, God's Plan for Men. You also know him from all of the attendant Forge Conference goings-on here in Des Moines. John, thank you for coming on the Catholic Morning Show.
Hey, it's great to be back. Thanks so much for having me again this morning.
So again, we've had the chance to talk to you, talk with various people that were at the Forge conferences. You're a known quantity here in the Iowa Catholic Radio listening area, but you have a new book, New Adam, God's Plan for Men. So, tell us about it. What was motivations? What brought about this book?
Yeah, the fundamental motivation for the book came about as a result of something that I've spoken about so many times here on the station and elsewhere, and that's that. Okay, we've got a crisis of men and masculinity in our church and in our culture. We've seen declining rates of religious participation amongst men, and we've seen declining rates of fatherhood, of male flourishing generally, whether that's in the workforce, whether that's in relationships, of course, in the family, and like I said, in the church. Now, one of the things that I think is motivating that crisis of men and masculinity is a lack of a clear and winning picture for our young men on what it means to be a man. When I was writing my doctoral dissertation at Catholic University of America on this topic of the crisis of men and masculinity, what I did in that dissertation is I decided that I wanted to spend a lot of time using sources that I took to be either scientifically credible and grounded or just good, strong theology, and build a kind of picture of what it looks like to be a good man. So when I was doing my doctoral studies, I rubbed together the thought of John Paul II, most especially theology of the body, and then contemporary science, specifically evolutionary biology, and what a constructed, kind of painted, a really long version in about 400 pages of what it looks like to be a good man, saying, hey, if we were to develop the thought of John Paul II in his theology of the body and construct the kind of masculine genius, some of our listeners might be familiar with John Paul's term, the feminine genius. I thought, gosh, what would if John Paul was alive today, what would he say are the gifts and charisms that are particular to men? And what does it look like to be a good man, to be a holy man? What's the picture of thriving, holy masculinity? And so I did that, wrote the doctoral dissertation, defended it a few years ago, and honestly didn't think that I would ever do a whole lot with it. It wasn't until after that got done that the whole idea of Forge came about. And then subsequently, I was approached a little over a year ago by our Sunday visitor and my doctoral dissertation advisor saying, hey, what if you took this kind of big tome, your doctoral dissertation, and wrote it in a popular format? And that's the book, New Adam, God's Plan for Men. And 132 pages. I say it's written for guys, so it's short. For the nerds out there who read the book, there are about 25 pages of footnotes at the end for guys that want to dig in a little bit deeper. But the book itself is something that you can get through very quickly. And highly commend it to all your listeners.
So when it comes to, like you said, John Paul II, the theology of the body, and the original aspect of him talking about the feminine genius, obviously in his time and day, being willing to show that Catholicism not only has something to say to women, but that it had a vision for women in the face of, sort of the modern feminist movements, things like this. Waiting, as it were, for a few decades now here in the 2020s, what do you think it is that has shifted, not only with, like you said, that there's difficulties that have come up with understanding of being a man and things like this, but what is it that it's the time now is the good and necessary time and day to start to bring these issues, for men specifically, to the forefront?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bo. When John Paul was writing, Theology of the Body, when he was throughout the entirety of his pontificate, one of the new confusions on the scene in the culture at large, particularly in Western culture, was a confusion about who women are, what contribution they had to make to society. There had, in the decades prior to John Paul II's pontificate, and certainly during his pontificate, a kind of ushering of women into public life in a broader way. And some of that was good and holy, but other dimensions of what might be referred to as second and third wave feminism were certainly confused. Everyone, there are certain strains of feminism that are detrimental to women, that cause confusion about sexuality, about the family. And John Paul II wanted to say, women, you are good, and God made you good. God made you holy. And the church, contrary to what the culture might be telling you, is not trying to tell women that they have no contribution to make, or that they, in their femininity, are unholy. Quite the opposite. What the church is trying to do is to highlight the beauty of femininity. And so John Paul II, when he wrote on femininity, was speaking into one of the chief cultural confusions of his time that was affecting the church as well. Now, today, there is a pretty straightforward argument to be made that the confusion present about women and about femininity during John Paul II's pontificate has certainly not gone away, but the confusion about men and masculinity has increased almost to the degree that men might be more confused today than their female counterparts. So if we're to kind of imitate the saints and imitate the way that John Paul II acted, I think that what we're called to do is to speak into the chief cultural confusions of our day. And New Adam is really an attempt to do just that, to say, okay, in every time, every period of history, there are things about which humanity becomes deeply confused. And that's a reason to be concerned. It's also a reason to be deeply excited, because what seems to inevitably happen in those times is the confusion becomes an occasion for deeper clarity. So John Paul II thought was an occasion for clarity about sexuality, about family, about femininity, and about masculinity too. But anyone who reads John Paul knows that he speaks more directly to women and to femininity than he does to masculinity. And so this book is a development of thought, saying, hey, if he was alive today and we were to apply the things that he spoke about, theology of the body in particular, to the topic of men, this is what he might say. And I think men will find great consolation, great guidance, great empowerment in New Adam.
Well, in that regard, too, so John Paul II, in dealing with, like you said, the chief confusion of his time, was neither accommodating or reactionary. His idea, right, was that the sort of Catholic third way, the both and, that there's a different way to understand feminine genius that is native to the church and is just waiting its time, as it were, to clarify mystifications, difficulties, and confusions on both sides. It seems to me that that's one of the things you're trying to address as well. It's not simply that there are new confusions with masculinity, therefore we should just be reactive or fall back into what we think is sort of like an easily defined manner. Again, the Catholic vision of what it means to be masculine is neither completely accommodationist to the age, nor is it just a simple, read, from a poster in 1950 and you got it all solved. Do you think that that's one of the sort of main purposes for something like Forge, or what you're trying to accomplish in the book, is because of 2026 and things like social media, there's often two easy answers to these questions about masculinity for offer online?
Yeah, that's very well said, Bo. So I think that when people consider the whole topic of men and masculinity, there's two easy outs. Right? We can either sort of do away with masculinity and say that it's maybe a cultural construct or just dismiss it as toxic and not give it any regard. That's one easy out. The other easy out is to just kind of roll the clock back to, you mentioned 1950s masculinity, and say that, okay, people are confused about masculinity today, so let's just roll the clock back to a time when people seem to be more confident in their understanding of masculinity. And let's just raise our men in the same way that men were raised in the 1950s and in times prior. And what I propose in the book is to say that neither of these solutions is going to work ultimately. You might think, for example, the men of the 1950s raised the men of the 1960s, and so there clearly couldn't have been something perfect. And a reductive view of masculinity, though easier, is not going to be satisfying to the human experience, to the human heart, to different kinds of men. And so one of the things that I say in the book is that in the same way that the church has canonized different brands of femininity, you might think, for example, of St. Therese of Lisieux in contrast to Joan of Arc, right? Those two women looked very different. So too does our faith give us the tools to articulate the beauty of different kinds of men. And so there might be a kind of man, say, a certain personality type that is you might think of like a choleric, very testosterone-filled kind of man who is different than a man who's maybe an artist or an entrepreneur or something like that. And to have a picture of masculinity that is still clear and inspiring for our young men, but that doesn't eliminate and kind of alienate different kinds of men is really what New Adam is all about. So I'm really passionate about that topic, and I think it's critical that we thread the needle correctly by articulating a picture of masculinity that can appeal to various different kinds of men, obviously without eliminating the sexual binary, but articulating masculinity in a way that is actually winsome and appealing, not just to a certain fraction of men, but to the whole swath of masculine personality types.
Absolutely. Well, folks, the book is out with our Sunday Visitor. The name of the book, New Adam, God's Plan for Men, out by Dr. John Bishop. John, thank you for coming on the Catholic Morning Show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.